Howdy, all of you delicious people. I'm here today to review Yellowstone, Season 4, Episodes 7 and 8. So, going on into these episodes, it seems that we were kind of concerned about where the path of certain characters were going to head, but it seems like they're coming back onto the ranch, so that's good. We have also an interesting surprise that is going to be in store for especially the end of this episode and is kind of go and carry on to the next episode. We also have a surprise at the end of episode 8 because honestly some people might have said, well, about this character, but I was like, oh my god, wow, they went this direction with this character. What a surprise, because it feels like they're doing that for both episodes. So yeah, I really liked how eventually these episodes were to turn out, even though there is at some point in time there's a birds and the bee kind of episode in here also, weirdly. We kind of have one of those where we have some people who are going on and saying well, should we tell him what we're actually talking about here, or should we go on and give him this talk finally? Plus we not only have that, but we also have Jimmy doing something really on the show that I didn't think was going to be a thing to see on this show, but god dang it, Jimmy. You're really putting in the work there to go and do have to do a job like that, because hey, it's a common job to do. Some people will think oh, maybe they shouldn't have shown what Jimmy is doing in one of these episodes. But I'm like, hey man, you see, go and watch the show The Ranch, and they're putting hands through cattle's patucuses, and so basically you're having to see all kinds of jobs being done through these things, and it gives us a real sense of realism, even though some people are like, hey, I didn't want to see that kind of realism on the show. But freaking, hey, give it to Jimmy for having to do something really awkward on this show. Give him all the respect for him having to do that kind of scene. That's what I can appreciate about this overall, is they're willing to go and do certain places that you wouldn't expect from this show, which kind of gives us this, okay, all right, so they're giving me this now, they're showcasing that. All right. Interesting. So, with that said, yeah, I think that, I also like what they're doing with Summer Higgins. It feels like she was going to be this short burst character, but it seems like they now have a direction now for her to go, and a real some kind of goal to really accomplish here. And I can like that about this character, that it seems that they're figuring out easily what to do with this character, and kind of it's like a Summer and Beth team up, which is possibly a fairly deadly combination. But yeah, so going into this episode, I think anything more than that, I'm just gonna leave vaguely off. I like what they do, of course, with Lloyd in this episode. Lloyd and Walker, what they're kind of there's kind of the aftermath of that whole fighting situation that they're now going on and trying to give you the aftermath of that. So yeah, I can really still enjoy this episode. It has that good payoff kind of episode where they're giving you this awe kind of reaction at the end of these episodes. And that's what I can like about these things, where it's giving you like not exactly a cliffhanger thing. It's giving you a like, ooh, like so like I see where this story can go, and that's what I like about it the most. Is it kind of gives you this cliffhanging thing that helps story. So with that said, let's go into that double five time territory because it's about that time again to go into this thing called spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about that time I'm going to spoil this episode. Hopefully, I'm able to remember all of this stuff from all these 2 episodes. There's a lot of stuff to just rattle off here, so let's get into it. So, the weird, bizarrish opening of this episode, I think, is to just show the sixes going and doing their job, going and doing bizarrely. Because I was like, there's no dialogue here. There's nobody saying anything to anybody, and I just thought that that was kind of a weird opening. So, because it was like just an opening where nobody says anything, no one's dying, no one's getting shot, nobody's going, what? I'm weirdly expecting for us to have one episode where they kill somebody off in the very beginning of the episode, and we're just like, what? And then we go into like 8 hours earlier, and then we're like, oh, we have to have the lead up of understanding of how that all happened. Man, wouldn't that just be a shocker for like somebody to go in the show, find out somebody's to be shot or dead or whatever, and then they like make you watch the rest of the episode to figure out why. I think that would be a cool way to do one episode, but I'm sure that would also take a lot of people off. Not quite sure. Well, like when really looking at it, there has to be one show that kind of gets you really interested in the beginning of it, because I think we do have some time where like they do too many of these cliffhanger ending episodes. Like I would much rather have them doing something in the very early stages. We're just like, like I'm interested. Like the whole Tim McGraw Faith Hill episode was really something where they keep introducing these characters. I'm assuming they're gonna possibly make a spin-off maybe of this. Because it seems like they're going to do a billion freaking spin-offs of this Yellowstone thing, and I think a lot of people would be okay with that. So this is going to turn into Walking Dead. The more successful this becomes, the more they want to go and like, hey, let's do 20 different shows of this. Let's just tie one person into a whole entire show, which would be fine to just kind of build up other things. So going into the early stages of this episode, we of course have like I'm not going to do this perfectly like the show. I'll just be all over the place, and at least it'll just get all of the stuff that I want out. So John is going onto his horse, and of course we still have Carter that still has some apologizing to do. And we of course have John telling Carter that, hey, you need to apologize. Like, because if you don't apologize to Beth, like, you don't deserve to be here because she's your meal ticket, basically. She's she's the reason why you're here. So if you tick her off, like, you might as well just be, like, deciding right now that you're going to go back into some kind of system or some kind of something. And we end up having Carter, like, talking, like, the way he phrases it and the way he goes into it is to almost say that he is to be accepting of having to go into foster care. So John goes on and is to all of a sudden to see Teeter here. I'm like, yes, like have her come back. Because I thought she was a fun character. Like, yeah, like we do have a lot of fun characters. I wish there were certain characters that did have a little bit more like time in the sun more. But like I think Teeter being involved with the bunkhouse is just they really have a very smart thing of what to do with her, and having her being put back in there was really a good idea. So Teeter is to go on and talk to both Rip and John, and mention that the fight between Lloyd and Walker had nothing to do with her, and so Teeter is talking to John and Rip and telling them that, like, hey, like, I worked harder than anybody else on this ranch, so like, I want to come back, because what was the point of getting this scar that she ends up showing, of course, John and Rip. Like, what did I get this scar for? What did it, like, did it never mean anything? Because they are to say that the scar is to be loyalty, that the scar is to be tenure, and so on and so forth. And we turn around here and have Teeter just being uh, chucked out of here just because of some disagreement that wasn't even going on with her, that she wasn't even involved in. She just wanted a job somewhere. So John is to go on and have Rip and him have this private conversation about how she got that scar, and Rip explains the whole, like, Wade situation, where, like, she was involved in going after Wade and killing him and so on and so forth. And so John is just like, well, okay. So because John was adamant about that at some point Teeter is going to have some man fighting over her, and so that's the reason why John got rid of all the women. So, but it seems that also Laramie is also making her way back into the bunkhouse. So, what difference did they really make here? None? I'm confused. So, Rip is to tell Teeter, it's like, well, hey, like, where's all your stuff? And she's like, in the back of my truck. And he's like, good. So, like, get all your stuff in the bunkhouse. And Rip tells Teeter, it's like, yeah, that scar, that means something. I'm like, man, that's really nice. That's really nice. I like that. I like that whole, the whole line there. So, we. I'm trying to see if there's any John or Rip stuff that I should cover here. I can cover the John thing. Let's cover the John thing. Because I want to try to kind of get all these bits and pieces out of the way and try to, like, perfectly go into, like, oh, okay, well, now I've covered all of this stuff on one fell swoop, and so that I can go into other little tiny stories and then kind of finish up with all of the other stuff that I have to go into. So John is going on and doing his seemingly normal job, and Governor Perry's to show up and be like, hey, I thought you retired. And John's like, I didn't retire from this. So Governor Perry is wanting John to just, like, hey, can we talk for a little bit? And so John has to go and kind of lob over this fence. And he's like, man, before I used to just jump over it. It's like, well, yeah, like, I wouldn't be jumping over a freaking fence like that either. Like, yeah. I don't have the good knees and all kinds of stuff to be jumping over a fence like that. So hey, like, all respect for Kevin Costner, like, the whole fence thing. So John goes on and is talking to Governor Perry, and so he goes and has Perry mention that she's going to go off to do some Senate things. Because we already have people already whispering in people's ear that Governor Perry isn't going to be a governor anyways. And so Governor Perry is to, of course, say, like, hey, like, it's time for Jamie to become a governor. And John's like, no. Nope. Like, you need to come up with somebody else. And Perry's just like, well, there could be other two candidates. And so John is like, no, I'll just do it. Like, thanks for your endorsement, I'll do it. And she's like, are you serious? And he's like, yeah. And she's like, well, great. Like, I think there's a lot of ways that we can work with this. So Governor Perry drives off, and John is like, oh my god, what did I get myself into? What the am I doing here? So, because he doesn't want this job. Like, he got out of livestock to go on to just have the ranch, and that was it. And now he's back into politics. God dang it. So we have John breaking it to Beth that, hey, yeah, I'm going to become the governor. And Beth's like, oh my god, yeah. And so Beth is coming up with all the ways that John himself personally can go after these market equity people and get rid of them. And so Beth is just like, yeah, like, I'm going to help you get this position and all this and that. And John's like, I don't want this position. Give me someone else that's going to take this position. And Beth's just like, no, like you're the perfect guy for the job. And so John is taking his glass and chucking it in the fireplace after this whole conversation because it's like, no, I was just filling a spot, but I don't want to do this job. No. God, that's where, like, when you're working at some place and like, you know, you're going into a bigger position because there's no one else that's going to even try to apply to that position. So you're just like, psh, like, I'm a shoe-in to get this thing. But then when you go into the actual position, you're just like, why did I even accept this? Like, I really didn't want this position. And like, there's some people that are just kind of forced into a position that they're not experienced for, but like, for me, like, I was experienced. It was just the fact that, like, I was already getting to a point of doing that same kind of job anyways, and I was like, you know what, I don't want more. I don't want more of what I'm already doing. Like, I don't want to be freaking pigeonholed into one position and being stuck doing that and, like, just driving me crazy. No, like, I would rather just have the free range to do whatever I want, and I feel like I wasn't going to be doing that when stuck where I was. So going on into this, we eventually have Beth, who is trying to wrangle. Wrangle sounds horrible. Beth is going on and talking, communicating with Summer. With Summer, of course, the protester that we had saw in the previous episode. And so it seems that Summer is doing this protest, like, for his murder and all that jazz. No offense to a protester that takes that kind of job on, trying to be nice to protesters. Like, they're cool. Like, they're passionate about something. So Beth goes on and is to tell Summer, it's like, well, because Beth wants Summer to deal with the market equity people, because Beth is to go on and find out that Ellis Steele, under Beth's nose, is still having the plan of taking over Yellowstone. And Beth is like, huh? Like, I thought we were trying to go and do anything but this, but we're still going and doing this. And Beth is just like, well, how is it that you guys have made a whole mapping out system saying that you now own Yellowstone when it's not a done deal and that land is still not owned by you? And they're like, well, it's already in the bag. Like, Beth, come on and get on the bandwagon of us owning your land. Suck it, Beth. And Beth's like, no, I will not suck it. No, that's not me. I'm the person that'll just cut it off right then and there. So Beth is going in sicking summer on the market equity people and protesting on and camping out, and eventually this camp is to be raided by all these police officers. And so now Beth is sicking a bunch of reporters out to cover all of this so that way they can get coverage on this, because Beth is calling these reporters out right away to have summer be going on and being in the news and having all this coverage about what market equities is doing to these people and so on and so forth, that several people had been injured and all this kinds of jazz. So Carter is to go on to talk to Beth, kind of keeping the Beth theme here. So Carter is to go on and tell Beth that he wants to ride into town as he's trying to give her flowers, and Beth is like, don't give me flowers. Like, don't give me flowers to say that you're sorry, because, like, just give me flowers when, like, it's just a random day. Like, I like that. Like, there was this one goofy movie, but there was one thing that I got out of it. There was this one uh, part of that story where it's called Joanna Man, and we had the one character who really fell in love with, I think, Vivica A. Fox's character, and eventually gave her flowers just because it was Wednesday, and because that was the thing that she liked. And so, like, having, like, Beth kind of say that was just like, yeah, like I would believe in that kind of thing, that it's like you don't have to, like, it's not a holiday thing, it's not a what, it's just like, hey, like, random present, here you are, just because it's a day of the week, kind of thing. So so Carter is mentioning to Beth that he wants to go into this system of the foster home because really this isn't a life. Like him having to possibly be up at like 4 in the morning when he's going and telling Lloyd, it's like, that's not a like that's not morning, that's nighttime. Any way you slice it. And Lloyd's just like, well, yeah, like sorry, it's like that's the time everybody gets up. That's the life of a farmer. Like, sorry, like. So Carter is saying that what he has here isn't a life. It's just him having to figure out where he's going to eat next and where he's going to sleep next. Like, that's all this really is. And so Beth is like, well, like, so what, you don't have a dream? And he's like, dude, there's no way I'm ever going to have a dream or a goal or a hope or whatever. Like, no. So Beth is to set Carter straight. Just kind of tell Carter, it's like, well, you know what? Like, you're going to go on and if you don't understand something, you're going to ask me questions. And even when you do understand something, ask me more questions. And like, you're gonna go on and live with us, and things are gonna work out. So this and that, blah 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 blah. So Carter and Beth shake on it like it's a weird business deal. It should be a family, but it's like a business deal, weirdly. So Carter goes off feeling that he had gone on to work it out with Beth, and I was like, oh, okay, so it's good that they finally got to this, because as if they're gonna get right to it the very next episode. No, But that's usually the surprise about the show, where they keep continuing to bring up certain things and then finally take the time to cover it. But it gives them some dialogue to just kind of build up to. Like the whole John situation where he's telling Carter to get ugly, or John is telling Carter to finally go and talk to Beth. Like there's dialogue to be kind of just put into this story to just kind of give us more time here in the show. So we also have in this episode or in these episodes, I should say, we also have John going and talking to Beth and mentioning that the lodge is basically empty, and John really wants Beth's family in the lodge. And Beth is just like, well, then you're going to have to talk to Rip about that. And so John is just like, well, why don't you just talk to Rip about... And Beth is like, no. You want this to happen, so you need to talk to Rip about it. And so John is to go and talk to Rip, and when he does talk to him about it, it's just like, well, that's settled. Like, you're gonna live in the lodge. Like, they don't really talk about it. They don't really, like say, hey, do you want to live in the lodge? Because because we have John who phrases it as not even a question. He's like, yeah, like the lodge needs a family in it. And Rip is just like, what? And John's like, well, yeah, I guess that's not a question. And Rip's like, well, yeah, I don't know. And so they kind of continue to talk about it, but it's still like John is like, well, that's settled. And like, if I were Rip, I'm like, what do we even talk about? What are we even saying here? What is the lingo that I must have missed somewhere? Like, it's kind of like when I was to go and talk to this one guy, this guy that was to be like kind of my boss. And the weird thing about this guy is that he would go and tell me these things to do, but then all of a sudden there was, I guess, some unspoken thing that I was supposed to do that he never said. And then he was kind of yelling at me for it. And I'm like, for what? And then he was like, oh, like, do this and this and this. I told you this, right? I'm like, no, like, you only told me to do this and this. That's all you said. So it's kind of like that whole lost in translation kind of thing that we're getting here. So, but like, that guy used to just do that all of the time, and I was just like, man, this guy's my boss, and I'm just trying not to get freaking let go here for not doing some job. And I'm like, it got to the point where I got used to it, where I'm just like, is there anything else that you need me to do? So that way I know that you're going to have me do all these things, and I won't need to be yelled at again, and you come back here and I have some weird job that you never told me to do now. But hey, that's why you don't do certain jobs anymore. That's what happens. So now let's go on and cover more stuff from episode 7. So we go on and we have eventually Lloyd going off to some pawn shop, and he's heavily looking at these guns. Just his eyes are on these guns. And we have Lloyd going and having this belt buckle that's supposedly one of a kind. I'm like, man, I wouldn't have sold that, but I guess like Lloyd just needs money, and like maybe he has no real sentimental value to that buckle, because maybe he has so many. I don't know. So Lloyd is going and sell this thing, and he's looking at these guns, heavily looking at them. And so Lloyd comes back to the bunkhouse, And immediately everybody's like, oh, is he desperadoing this? Is he gonna be Antonio Banderas, where he has this guitar case and there's a bazooka inside of it, where he's gonna go like plow and kill somebody horrifically? What's going on here? So Lloyd, of course, is to come in to try and make amends with Walker for destroying his guitar. And so Lloyd ends up going and giving him a like a pawned one, but it looks brand new. So Lloyd is to mention that he doesn't know anything about guitars, but like the guy who sold it to him said that it was a good one. So Walker goes and opens this up and he's like, yeah, it's way better than the guitar that I had before, so, like, thank you kind of thing. So Walker goes on and is to play a song for Lloyd and asks him, like, well, hey, like, what do you want me to play for you? And Lloyd's like, I don't know, whatever. So we have Walker who goes and plays off this song, and we, of course, have some kind of, like, cattle job being done in the background somewhere. So Jimmy is to go off, and how is Rainwater in this episode? Oh my god. There's too many characters in this episode. Oh yeah, the Avery situation. There we go. Good God, is there too many things going on in here? So Jimmy is going, and he is to be told to go to this one location because he is, of course, to find out that he is to be J-O-ing a horse. And Jimmy is like, what? Like, basically, this horse just starts to jump on this other, like, this kind of statued horse. And this horse is starting to hump away at this. So, Jimmy is going on and is grabbing this horse's Johnson here and is putting it in something for it to basically just start pounding away. And Jimmy is saying, oh my god, did I just J-O a horse? And they're like, yep. Because Jimmy is to have this be the weirdest, awkwardest way for him to meet this girl named Emily. And so, like, it just feels like it feels random for Emily to just show up here and for her to eventually, like, start going after Jimmy the way she does. Because we have Jimmy that's continuing on to, like, do this job, and he's getting, like, heavily dirty all the time. Like, this guy is always just, like, he has a body full of dirt, and, like, yeah, I know, like, where you just eventually get, like, to where your skin is just like, man, is my skin just dirt now? Am I the Sandman? Like, what the heck is this? Because your hands just get so dirty from working with all of this, like, this stuff. So Jimmy at one point is to go and finish up for the day, and Emily's just like, well, hey, like, do you want to go out somewhere? Because it seems there's a very limited amount of guys who are all single here. And Jimmy doesn't exactly know if he's single. Like, it seems that since he didn't write Mia this letter, it seems like he's single. So, I don't know, that just seems weird. That I guess Jimmy is to not realize how long he's going to be here for, so we might as well just be with Emily for the time being. Because Emily is to mention that there's only so few guys that are single here, and so she might as well go after Jimmy. So Jimmy is to have Emily want to buy him dinner, but Jimmy's like, no, like, how about this? How about we go and, like, I'll buy you dinner? So they go off, and Emily is to go and ask Jimmy, it's like, well, hey, you hungry? As he is to get done with another day. And Jimmy's like, yeah, I could probably eat. So Emily is telling him, it's like, well, hey, let's go somewhere. And Jimmy's like, well, yeah, but I want to like shower up, and like the place where I can shower is like 2 hours away. And she's like, well, like there's a shower over there. And he's just like, okay. So he ends up going and showering, and Emily thought that he wouldn't literally go ahead and do that. And so Emily pops in there to basically see Jimmy and just kind of bathing it out. And we end up having, I guess, Jimmy's tattoo that obviously is to be re-put on here, because you could tell that his like chest was shaved to re-put on that Y, because of course, like, and it also like it kind of looks like the logo looks weirdly, not focusing too much on Jimmy's chest, but like, here's a story. So there are certain times where there's people that have to do these shower scenes, and a lot of times it's weirdly back and forth about whether a guy should have chest hair or not. And I wonder if Jimmy, through that whole scene, had to go back and forth of whether or not Jimmy's chest should be shaved. Because, good God, I know there was one guy who complained that he was like, yeah, like, I did one, like, shower scene, and they were going on and on and on about my chest hair, about whether I should shave it or not. And there was like a whole hour talk about whether or not that I should have, like, my chest shaved or not, and they said that it would be fine. But then all of a sudden, once I went into the scene and started going and doing the scene, all of a sudden there was one random person that said, like, hey, shave. It's like, mother. So Jimmy is to, of course, talk to Emily, and Emily is to say, it's like, well, hey, I didn't think that you would take this literally. I thought, like, hey, there's a bunkhouse that has a shower in there. You could have went in there and used that. And he was like, oh, well, I guess I know now. So, but I guess Emily got to see what Jimmy is technically packing one way or another, meaning muscles or uh, chest. So, unless we're going further downtown. So, so Jimmy and Emily go on to this restaurant, and so Jimmy's going on to say that he doesn't think that he's a cowboy. He's telling Emily his life story because Jimmy is to mention that as a favor to Jimmy's grandfather, Jimmy went on to go on to this ranch, and he ended up getting branded and all this kinds of stuff. And so Jimmy went on to go and tell his all of the truth about his life. And so he's like, man, so you're telling me the whole truth, nothing but the truth? And he's like, well, yeah, like, that's just who I am. Like, what am I gonna do, lie? Like, I would probably have that same kind of thing too, where it's like, well, hey, like, tell everybody the truth, because they're gonna find out eventually, the more and more that you date this person. And why would you lie anyways? Life is too freaking short. So Emily is saying, it's like, well, why do you think that you're not a cowboy? And Jimmy just like, man, I'm just not really good at this, and all this kind of stuff. But then all of a sudden we end up having Jimmy's boss, who knows Jimmy's name and is shaking his hand, and meeting his boss's wife and like and we have it where Jimmy is so polite here, like so weirdly polite, and like I really appreciate that because like for me I'd be like yes sir, no sir, and I'd be polite too. I'd be like please and thank yous and whatever, because like especially if you're in a place that you're not familiar with, that's when you start to be way more polite than you probably would if you were at your common everyday place. So Jimmy's to go and sit back down, and Emily's saying it's like, well, hey, if that guy knows your name, and like you're a cowboy, like you're good at what you do. Uh, Jimmy, I don't know, like they didn't show if Jimmy could rope or not, because all they showed him do is like certain guys going and roping, and some guys injecting the cattle with something. Uh, so we we have eventually Jimmy and Emily after this dinner is over. We go on to have them go back to Emily's house or Emily's place. And so it seems that Jimmy needs to learn the protocol here because he's an out of towner. So Emily tells him to like, hey, like let's just go to the, just walk me to the front of the place. And so Jimmy goes on, and Jimmy is to go and kiss Emily because Emily's saying it's like, well, should you not? Like there's a catch 22 to this, and so Jimmy just goes on and kisses Emily, and then he's like, well, maybe I should go right off to the sunset, and Emily's just like, well, hey, the sun is already set, like saying that's like, hey, if you want to do a little bit more than that, you can. So Jimmy just goes on and continuously kisses Emily, waiting for them to make it back into her place, and then they start to go at it. I'm like, oh, okay, all right, good for Jimmy, woohoo! All right, that seems so weird. So so awkward, right? Awkward. Awkward is the word of the day. Uh, so let's transition here. So Casey is to go on and find Avery's horse thieves. And so Casey is to go on and find these thieves and book them, Dano, and whatever. And so eventually, Rainwater and Mo are to be right there when Casey is to catch, of course, these people. And we have Rainwater who's telling Casey, it's like, you know what, like that girl is kind of looking at you. And Casey's just like, well, hey, I'm married, and like Rainwater's just like, uh-huh. So after this is all wrapped up, we all of a sudden have Avery who's starting to approach Casey, and Casey is kind of getting uncomfortable here. And so Avery is saying that, have you ever heard of love at first sight? And Casey's just like, well, yeah. Like, I felt that way when I met my wife. And Avery was like, well, the very first time that I saw you, I felt that same way. And Casey's like, well, that's too bad, because wife, kid, and like, sorry, there's nothing I can do about that. So like we have like, come on, like Casey is like this goody good guy, and like that sounds weird, but like he's gonna give in to temptation. Like this guy has a woman that can, like, it's not like there's problems in the marriage really now. Like everything is going so smoothly, and he has a son that he loves. Like everything is going well. we have Casey that doesn't really have a problem in the world except for a gun that's to be at some point pointing at him here or there sometimes. But Casey doesn't really have a real legitimate problem in the world right now. So Casey is not going to give in to Avery. I don't even know why they did that whole story. I think it's really to just have Avery have something to do here because it's kind of nice to bring her back. And maybe we'll eventually see Avery somewhere down the road somewhere, but it'll be interesting to see if they ever do something with her. But yeah, so we also have Beth, who is to go into her brand new office, and immediately what she does is fire her new assistant called Cal. Cal? Um, Beth is to go on and mention that Cal evidently is to be dating one of his coworkers, and so Beth is just like, well, I'm not going to have you like being a gopher for me and chasing after some skirt. Like, no, like, goodbye, you're fired. So Cal is going in his cubicle, and Beth is like, Cal, you don't look fired. Get your stuff. Go. You're fired. And I'm like, man, like, oh my god. So now let's get to the tail end of episode 7. So we have Jamie that's to, of course, be called out for Governor Perry to talk to have kind of Jamie go off with Perry, Dutton, or John, and Beth. And so Jamie is like, I'm a little surprised that you're here, John. And John's like, yeah, I wouldn't miss this for the world. So Perry is going and making this statement about that she's gearing up to go to the Senate and that she's going to endorse this new uh, person for governor who is to be John Dutton. As Jamie was almost getting ready to walk down these stairs, to all of a sudden find out that all of a sudden John is now walking down these stairs and is like, yeah. And then Beth is just like, well, this is just the beginning. Like, because realizing that John is going to possibly have more power over Jamie, we start to have kind of Beth thinking that, like, John is going to possibly figure out some way of getting rid of Jamie if Jamie steps out of line at some point. So let's go on and talk about the other stuff that is to possibly happen within the following episode. So Jamie is now going on and talking to Garrett and Christina about, like, how could his father do this to me, kind of thing. How could John have done this? And so we had, of course, Garrett talking in episode 7 and asking, like, having this conversation with Christina and asking, it's like, well, hey, like, how do you feel about Jamie? Like, do you think that he could be a politician? Do you think he could be a governor? And it seems that Christina's like, you know what, I think I can probably see him as a governor. And Garrett's like, good answer. In the back of his mind, he's like, good answer. Because Garrett, of course, was telling Jamie that he's going to try and work on this relationship with Christina and Jamie. And Garrett is just going to try to keep on continuing to, like, work on things to improve Jamie's life here. So, as well as, like, Jamie is to turn around and have Garrett like, hey man, like, live with me. So Jamie is now talking to both Garrett and Christina and is like, how could John have done this to me? And so Garrett is thinking, it's like, well, hey, like, John is not like both Garrett and Christina are telling Jamie that like, hey, he does not want this office. Like he wants to go on and get this office just so he can hand it to someone else. So like Jamie, you should go, and if you want this, you should try to go after it because like John doesn't want this. John wants to hand it off to someone else. And so Garrett is also like telling Jamie, it's like, well, hey, like, do you know, like, you know where the bodies are buried with John, right? You can kind of uncover some things that all of a sudden send John away for the rest of his life. If you can't kill him, then bury him, basically. Uh, Bury him in prison for the rest of his life. Find out all the underhanded things that he has ever done. And Garrett is also telling Jamie, it's like, well, hey, like, do you know a judge that'll owe you a favor? And Jamie's like, well, no. And Garrett's like, well, find one. Find one. So, so the big thing that ends up happening at the end of episode 8 is we end up having, of course, John and Rip going off to this one diner, supposedly going to talk to the sheriff. And John is wanting to talk to the sheriff so that way Terrell Riggins' life is to be a much shorter one. And so John goes to this diner to seemingly find out that it looks like people are at this diner, but they're all not eating weirdly. So Rip is to ask John, it's like, well, what kind of guns do you have in the vehicle? And he's like, well, I got a handgun and I got a rifle. And it's like, okay, good. So John goes into the restaurant and goes and starts firing on these men with these guns. And so Rip eventually goes and pulls a guy out of this window and starts beating the crap out of him with this one, like, metal thing of sorts. So we have Sheriff Donnie going and shooting this one man, but all of a sudden, Sheriff Donnie is also getting shot also. And it's like, oh my god. And so all of a sudden, we end up having John here, who is to take his phone from Sheriff Donnie, because Sheriff Donnie is to try to call a family member, I think his daughter or something, or probably his wife, and his wife was busy with something, and John is like, well, like wait a minute, because John is to tell a relative of Sheriff Donnie's that he's dead, because Sheriff Donnie was trying to call her and dies when he's like talking to her, because he like, hey, I can't like I have to talk to you now because he's gonna die. So we have this all nice and wrapped up in a nice neat little bow. I'm assuming that this is possibly from some kind of militia still. I don't feel like this is just a common crime here. It feels too much like this isn't just some random people from off the street trying to do this. Like, I think this is another militia thing, and the sheriff just got caught in the crosshairs of all this. So now on to episode 8. So we have Rip and we have Beth and we have Carter now living in this place. Rip at some point was to talk to John about like, well, hey, like I have like this stray kid working with me or living with me, and John is like, well, that's fine. And so it kind of starts to feel like the conversations between Carter and John are kind of making up for, like, we don't have the Tate and John, like, thing here. We don't have that connection. So we have John going and having everybody sit at the dinner table, and all of a sudden Beth is starting to rattle off about her, like, uh, her going and getting this certain kind of treatment of sorts, because they're talking about, like, their uh, their colons, and they're talking about this and that, and how, like, fruit will be really good for uh, like, their colon and stuff like that. And, like, Beth is going on and on and on about, like, the stuff that she has gone through for these certain kind of treatments. And John is like, good God, like, Beth, why are you talking about this at the dinner table? And so Beth runs off, and so Rip is like, what kind of like, what kind of childish thing are you working out on and in that dinner table there? Like, what kind of therapeutic thing are you trying to, like, get out of this? And so for Beth, she just hates this ranch. She just hates everything about it. And hence why when Beth would go on from seasons before and just be at this ranch, she would just be, like, howling at the moon for how much she hated this ranch, um, because of the history of it, uh, the compounding of things that she had to deal with for so long, that is to now be just lashed out here. And so we have Rip, who's just like, you know what, like, that table doesn't matter. Like, none of this place matters. Like, hey, if you want to go and eat somewhere, we'll eat at this coffee table right here. Who cares, like, where we're sitting? Like, who cares about the lodge? Like, just treat everything like it is not to have a real significance for it. Like, just treat it as an, like, I know for me there's a lot of times where, like, I don't feel like if you have a dinner, you need to sit at a dinner table. Like, if you just have dinner, you can just eat it wherever. Um, there is no significance to a kitchen table or dinner table or whatever, or like a whatever kind of, like, there is no significance to that. But every time Beth is to sit at a certain in this house, like, there's always a memory attached to it, and Rip is just wanting her to forget all of that, to just, like, hey, like, be in the moment, not have to, like, remember all the horrifying things that were to happen living here at one point. Just let it all go. So we eventually have Carter, who's eating steak and cake because Carter's like, well, like, could I still eat cake? And John's like, you can eat a thing of cake right now. I don't care. Like, just so, like, Carter just slapping this thing of cake onto his plate is like, okay, great. Like, just eat a meal. Who cares? So, like, it was kind of funny. Like, I was gonna go into that, but I was thinking, like, maybe I should go into something else also. Um, so episode 8, we uh, oh, in the very beginning of episode 8, we of course have James Dutton from the flashback of, like, seemingly an old west kind of tale, where we have James Dutton going on and finding these horse thieves, and he's going to advertise and make an example of them by hanging them up and having a note that says, this is what we do to horse thieves. It seems that his deputy that's working with him had gotten injured because his horse had bucked him off. And so we have Margaret Dutton, who's to be played by Faith Hill here, who's to go on and be sitting with her kids, and we have it where John Dutton Sr., who's a young kid now, is going on and saying grace, and he's saying it incorrectly, and so Margaret is consistently after him for trying to forcefully say grace correctly, and that there's only certain kinds of things that they should really be thankful for, and for James to go and hang somebody isn't one of them. So James eventually returns home for Margaret to find James bloody. And he's like, "Oh, well, that's not really my blood." Or like, "Oh no, like that's like I don't want to get your I don't want to get your house all like bloodied up." And Margaret's like, "I don't care. Get in here and we'll fix you up." And so James is to make it into the house, and he's like smearing blood on the door, and I guess he ends up falling over, and they're like, "Oh my god!" Like they go and like you can't really tell because Jim makes it into the house, so he could have just not fell over, but it sounded like a thing that he would have fell over. I don't know. So it seemed like he fell over. It gave the illusion that he probably fell over. So there was a loud bang and a loud crackle and a loud whatever. So I'm trying to think if there is anything else to cover here, because I think I've covered most weirdly of this episode, but I feel like there's a million other things that I still have to cover. Like Beth was to go on and tell the reporters ahead of time to cover that whole protest event because she was to give her their phone number, and so they were tipped off about this thing. Ellis was to tell, of course, Warner that, like, hey, yeah, like I'm sure that these reporters were tipped off, and so Warner's just like, that's interesting. So, I hope question mark that everything is covered here. Um, but I also feel like there's a million different. Oh no, wait. There's more. There's more Monica and Casey stuff. And yeah, there's some kind of some kind of birds and the bees kind of things going on in this episode also. So we have Monica who is to have Tate come out of the tub, and Monica's like, "Well, hey, get out of the tub and I'll help wash you off." And Tate's is like, "Yeah, no." And Monica's like, "What?" And so Tate is like, "Well, my body is going through some changes, and this body's a little different than what it used to be." And so Monica is like, "Oh." So Monica goes and talks to Casey, and she's just like, "Yeah, I think we need to give him the talk now, like the sex talk. Like I think he's getting older. I think he's having a little bit of a boy problem." Boy problem. Like I guess like for a show they need to try to figure out a way. Like plus Monica always has this kind of way about her where she tries to not have to say like certain things. Like she doesn't. I don't think I've ever seen Monica cuss on this show, or I've very rarely ever seen her cuss on this show. So like I guess they can't say the word like boner on this episode. So Casey is just like, "Well, hey, I don't have to tell him nothing. Like he'll figure it out like any other guy probably would." Cuz yeah, like I'm sure there was probably any number of people where it's like they didn't get that talk and they figured it out anyways. Uh Anybody probably would have. Yeah, probably. Eventually, you'll go on to see, like, especially with the convenience of streaming now, like, basically, like, every bit of information, so to speak, is at everyone's fingertips. Uh, Weirdly to say, but yeah, there isn't much that you'd have to go on to have to discover nowadays, especially with a number of rated R movies that are probably easily on a number of apps that are also with kids' things like an HBO Max and whichever. Uh, Parental guardian, whatever, like blocking and blah, 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 blah. Yeah, sure, but there's always stuff to find somewhere. Um, so Casey is to say, it's like, well, yeah, like, you know what, Tate, you know what's going to happen, Tate? He's gonna go till he's 16. He's gonna go and he's gonna find a girl, and then eventually they'll go and they'll be lovers, and eventually Tate will come and tell us that he got a young girl pregnant, and we have, of course, Monica, who's saying it's like, well, yeah, that's technically how we ended up, and so Casey's like, well, yeah, like if anything, like he doesn't need to know the birds and the bees like we do. Because Monica is just like, well, yeah, and speaking of which, speaking of the birds and the bees, we really do need to know that story because if anything, like, I'm pregnant. And Casey's like, what? Like we're gonna have another kid? And Monica's like, yeah. It's like, so Tate all of a sudden is kind of like, what are you guys talking about? I don't know what it is with Tate just coming in on just like Monica and Casey just consistently just kind of like it's so weird, it's so awkward, but still like so Casey is telling Tate that he's going to be a brother, and so Tate is like, well, great, like so you guys better kind of be like saving up some money because my babysitting duties won't come cheap. And so, like, okay, sure, kid. So, Tate goes off, and so, like, I'm wondering if actually Monica was just, like, legitimately pregnant, and so they had to, like, figure out a way to write it in the story, or maybe it was just, like, them, like, there are certain times where they can not have to write it in the story, that they can kind of conveniently hide it for as long as possible. And like I would never want a show to go that route where it's like, oh, they're obviously hiding that this girl is to be pregnant the whole entire time. Like I ended up watching this one show called Stanley's Lucky Man. Uh, in the later like seasons, there was to be this one girl who eventually got pregnant on the show, and they were coming up with all kinds of reasons for this girl to like hide her pregnancy. I'm like, no, like technically she had a lover, so why not just say that she was pregnant? Just be honest about it. They were coming up with so many things that had this like cliche-ish way of hiding this pregnancy. I'm like, no, just like write it in the story. You could have easily had it out there. So they like were trying to put outfits on her. They were trying to like put bulletproof vests on her and all kinds of stuff to just hide it. And I'm like, come on, like really? Come on, people. Uh, so it's good that like if it did actually happen on the show, that they came up with a way to write that into the show if it was a legitimate thing. So with that said, I don't know if I covered everything, but I think I covered a bulk of this show. Um, I'm trying to scratch my brain, metaphorically speaking, to think if there's anything left unsaid here, which I don't think there. I don't really think that there was or is or whatever. And I think all the stuff that I was going to cover is covered. I've spent an hour possibly covering this, and that usually seems to be the common ground of me covering everything. So with that said, if there's something that I forgot about, kind of racking my brain right now to think if there was anything left. No. So I'm gonna go on here and get out of here so I can go on to review some other things. So goodbye, everybody. Bye, everybody.